every country with a falling birth rate is running the same calculation. Japan just happens to be running it first. In part 1, we showed you the door. The 820,000 work visas, the 11 cemeteries, the father who couldn't bury his child, the mayor who won by keeping them out. The contradiction between needing workers and not wanting them. But that story raised harder questions. Questions that Japan isn't asking out loud. So in part 2, we're going to ask them. Why is the population declining? Is it the same reason everywhere? Who decided that migration was the answer? Has a population ever bounced back from this? What if robots could do the work instead? And what triggers a recovery if one comes at all? Let's start with the why. Japan's fertility rate is 1.15. That means for every 2 adults, just over 1 child. Replacement is 2.1. Japan hasn't been at replacement since 1974, that's 50 years of undershooting. But the number alone doesn't explain the cause. The cause is structural. 23% of Japanese men will never marry by age 50. Not divorced, never married. The share of men earning enough to support a family has been falling for 30 years. Then there's karoshi, death by overwork. Japan didn't invent long hours, but it did invent a word for working until your heart stops. 68% of Japanese women quit their jobs when they get married. Not because they want to, because the workplace makes it impossible to do both. And 1.46 million people, mostly young men, are classified as hikikomori, social recluses. They don't work, they don't date, they don't leave the house. Add those up. Low wages, long hours, no childcare. A generation that withdrew, that's not a birth rate problem, that's a society-shaped problem. But here's the thing people get wrong. They assume this is a Japan problem. It's not. South Korea's fertility rate is 0.75, the lowest of any country that has ever existed in peacetime. Their reasons overlap with Japan's, but aren't identical. It's the cost of housing in Seoul, the mandatory military service for men, the education arms race that costs more than a mortgage. China's rate is 1.0, but China's collapse has a different origin, the one-child policy. 35 years of enforced low fertility created a generation that was socialized into small families. When the policy was lifted, the birth rate didn't recover. The habit stuck. The Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, these were supposed to be the exception. Generous parental leave, subsidized childcare, gender-equal workplaces, and for a while it worked. But even their rates are now falling. Sweden dropped from 1.9 to 1.5 in a decade. The policies slowed the decline, they didn't stop it. France is the only large developed economy holding near replacement, around 1.8. France treats children like infrastructure, and even France is trending down. The pattern is global. The reasons differ, but the direction is the same. So the question is, does it reverse? To answer that, you need to understand the demographic transition model. It's the single most validated pattern in population science. Every industrializing society goes through it. Stage 1, high birth rates, high death rates. Population is stable. Stage 2, death rates fall because of medicine and sanitation, but birth rates stay high. Population explodes. Stage 3, birth rates start falling, women get educated, contraception becomes available, children stop being economic assets. Stage 4, both rates are low. Population stabilizes. And then there's what some researchers call stage 5. Birth rates fall below death rates. Population starts shrinking, and it doesn't come back. The model predicts the decline. It does not predict a rebound. You can formalize this with something called a Leslie matrix. It's a mathematical model that tracks a population through generations. How many women are born? How many survive to childbearing age? How many children each cohort produces? Run the Leslie matrix with a fertility rate below 2.1, and the result is not ambiguous. Each generation is smaller than the last. The decline accelerates. There is no built-in correction mechanism. The math doesn't bend back, it just keeps going down. And history confirms the math. The most striking case is Ireland. In 1841, Ireland's population was 8.2 million. Then the famine hit. By 1851, it was 6.6 million, a quarter of the country dead or emigrated. But here's the part nobody talks about. The famine ended in 1852. Ireland's population today, more than 170 years later, is still only 5.1 million. It never recovered. Not after the famine ended, not after independence, not after the Celtic Tiger, not after joining the EU. 170 years, and the island still has fewer people than it did before the crisis. Post-Roman Europe is even more extreme. After the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, it took 600 years for Europe's population to return to Roman-era levels. The assumption that populations bounce back is not supported by the data. Rebounds happen, but only under specific conditions, and those conditions are rare. So who decided that immigration was the answer? In Japan, it wasn't the public. It wasn't a referendum. It wasn't a national debate. It was Keidanren, the Japan Business Federation, the country's most powerful corporate lobby. Keidanren had been pushing for foreign labor access for decades: manufacturing, agriculture, construction, care work. In 2018, the Immigration Control Act was pushed through the Diet with minimal debate. Opposition lawmakers walked out. The public wasn't consulted. Prime Minister Abe insisted publicly that this was not immigration policy. His exact words, "This is not an immigration policy." He said that while signing the largest expansion of foreign worker admissions in Japanese history. The gap between what was said and what was done is the gap that defines this story. Keidanren needed bodies. The government delivered them. The public was told nothing was changing. And then there's the question nobody asks. What about the people already living where the workers are sent? In Part 1, we told the Hiji cemetery story from the perspective of the Muslim families and the town officials. But there's a civic argument on the other side that deserves to be heard. The strongest opposing voice isn't anti-Muslim. It isn't xenophobic. It sounds like this: we weren't consulted. No public hearing was held. No environmental data was shared in advance. Japan is an island nation with finite land. Burial requires permanent land allocation in a way cremation does not. That's not bigotry, that's a land use constraint. Existing Japanese cemeteries, including traditional Buddhist burial grounds, show no groundwater contamination. The science isn't on the objector's side. But the process complaint is legitimate. Show us the data, hold a hearing, don't tell us after the fact. No other developed democracy takes the position cremate or repatriate. Japan is alone in that. And the gap between the civic complaint, "we want a hearing," and the political outcome, "elect a mayor who blocks everything," is the space where extremism grows. So if immigration is a stopgap, what's the alternative? Japan is already testing one: robots. Kubota is deploying autonomous tractors across Japanese rice paddies. JR West has a humanoid maintenance robot working on rail infrastructure. Japan has more industrial robots per capita than any country on Earth. It's not hypothetical, it's already happening. But there's a gap between what robots can do and what the country needs. By 2040, Japan will be short 11 million workers. Most of that gap is in care, construction, agriculture, and services. A robot can weld a car door. It cannot bathe a 90-year-old woman with dignity. It cannot comfort a child. It cannot run a family restaurant. What if the robots were culturally programmed? Not to replace migrants, but to make migration unnecessary by meeting each local culture on its own terms. It sounds like science fiction, but Japan is closer to this than anyone. And the reason it's not discussed isn't technical. It's that the conversation about robots and migration happens in two separate rooms and nobody's opened the door between them. So what triggers a rebound? if one comes at all? The answer is not what you'd expect. It's not war. It's not hardship. It's not a crisis that forces people to have children. The post-World War II baby boom, the most famous population rebound in history, was not caused by the war itself. It was caused by what came after: economic stability. Incomes doubled in 20 years. Housing was affordable. A single salary could support a family. The correlation between economic uncertainty and fertility decline explains roughly 60% of the variation across developed countries. When people feel secure, they have children. When they don't, they wait. And when they wait long enough, they stop. Japan has had 30 years of economic stagnation, 3 decades of flat wages, precarious employment, and deflation. That is the opposite of the condition that triggers a baby boom. You don't get a baby boom from despair. You get it from confidence. And confidence is the one thing these countries can't manufacture. So here's the question no one wants to answer. What if the rebound never comes? The demographic transition model says it doesn't have to. The Leslie matrix says it won't. Ireland says it hasn't in 170 years. The post-Roman world says it took 6 centuries. Japan is not in a temporary dip. It's on a structural trajectory, the same one that every industrialized nation is entering at different speeds, for different reasons, with no proven exit. Immigration can fill the gap, but only if the society accepts it. Robots can handle some of the work, but not the human work. Every country with a falling birth rate is running the same calculation. How long before the decline becomes permanent? Japan isn't the exception, it's the preview. That's what the math says, that's what history says, and that's what we wanted to show you. If this changed how you see your next receipt, your next bill, your next upgrade, we did our job. Like and subscribe, we have more to show you.